All right, and this is the Fooladi Fitness Podcast, episode number 11, joined today by my guy, Zach Shankin, aka the Vitruvian man himself. A man with a lot of knowledge and wisdom when it comes to topics like spirituality, philosophy, self mastery, and all that good stuff, man. So I appreciate you joining the podcast, man, and I'm ready to run it up.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate you making the reach out. And like myself, this is how I've connected with a ton of people that I've wanted to have on, is just organically through finding their content online. And it's been an amazing journey to now be on the kind of reverse side of
Mm.
finally getting invited on other people's shows. And like, I'm always open to hopping on because I don't know, I love these conversations, just even one-on-one, even if it wasn't recorded. But I think we're all out here on the same mission to raise the collective consciousness. And so excited to see where this conversation goes, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And just starting off with that right now, you're on the same type of mission that I'm on, that a lot of these other people are on. So I wanted to ask you essentially, what were the events and the experiences previously in your background in life that caused you to hop on this path that we see you on today, create this brand that we see you building right now?
Man, that's an open-ended one, but
Mhm.
I will try to give a little bit of an origin story if I can. So I definitely think growing up, I was always kind of that black sheep archetype of the family, and I was having a conversation this previous week about it. It seems like every family always has at least one kid, and I have two younger brothers, but there's one child that seems to kind of just think a little bit differently, see things a little bit deeper. So that was like, I suppose, the temperament that was just inbuilt from me, maybe from previous lives or whatever you want to believe about that. But yeah, always looked at the world differently. Always thought that I was going to do different things or big things, choose an uncommon life path. But as you go through life, you don't. There's no sign up sheet for that kind of thing. So fast forward all the way through into university. It's my senior year, my last year at university. I'm looking down the
Mhm.
barrel of traditional 9 to 5 career path. I went to a very prestigious university, so I had great options coming out, but I also knew that that was not what I wanted for my life. So in parallel to recruiting for full-time jobs, I also was doing a lot of internal self-exploration, asking myself, like,
Mhm.
what is my gift to give the world? What are the things in my life that are potential ingredients or little like signals or directions that I could use to potentially forge that path for myself? And right around graduation, in parallel to taking a full-time position in engineering, I also made a really big investment into an online community and mastermind that taught you how to build
Mhm.
online businesses. That was the first step into the online world that I had ever made. I had never made an investment like that. I even had to take that loan from my younger brother because I didn't even have the cash to pay for it at the time. But it was just, again, this like intuitive moment where this opportunity arose, and for whatever reason I like just had this inner knowing that it was the right door to step in. I couldn't have explained it at the time. I still can't, even like looking back, say why, other than just an intuitive sense. And I think all of those exercises I was doing personally were laying that unconscious groundwork. So for about 10 months while working full time, I was building out the beginnings of what I have now with, at the time I was doing kind of a 12-week course. And then I also was starting to put content out for the first time ever on YouTube with a podcast and Instagram, and just kind of experimenting. It was, again, my first time putting anything online. And I just started with like my little Instagram account that I had from high school and college. And then it's
Mhm.
blossomed over the next 2.5 years into this kind of amazing universe. So that's how I am here. But I'm happy to go into any different threads there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I kind of want to talk about like what were those exercises or that kind of self work that you were doing essentially to kind of understand what you're talking about right now of like you were here for a deeper purpose, for a bigger reason, a bigger picture. How do you uncover that? I believe that everyone essentially is on that same path, but you have to do the inner work to kind of take away all the programming that you have, maybe from your family, from society, from your friends, from schools, all that stuff. So, what were the essential exercises that you did to kind of reconnect to your core, if you want to call it that, and then understand the pathway that God, the universe, or your soul has always known for you to go on?
Great question, and I'm glad you hit on that, like that unlearning aspect, because the simple but not necessarily easy aspect of this whole game is you don't have to do anything except be yourself So you just are stripping away the things that aren't you and the things that are wrong, as opposed to, building something new or uncovering, I don't know, this new aspect of yourself. It's already there. It's already inbuilt. That connection is constantly going on, and that story is underwritten what you're doing already. You're just kind of actively ignoring it, or you can't potentially hear that voice because of all the noise that's out there. So a lot of the exercises that I kind of distilled and eventually put into that 12-week program, and then now stepping away from that program for more one-on-one coaching, I've put them into a resource that I just give out for free now because I want people to have the toolkit. So if you go to the Vitruvian.co and sign up for my newsletter, you can get the PDF download. And if you don't want to do that, you can go to a previous podcast I did called the Da Vinci Blueprint. And that's a great place to start. So it has a lot of those exercises there. But I think the important thing is kind of establishing a framework. And in that Da Vinci Blueprint, you'll kind of see it in this order where it's the self, the mission, and then the vision. So I think a lot of people start the wrong way, which is like, what is this big thing that I'm going to connect myself to? Like, what am I going to do with my time? What is the mission I'm going to do? What is my massive vision? And I think it's very abstract, and it's really hard to get correct, if you will, by starting outside. So in my opinion, you have to start with the internal, assess and audit where you already are and all the data you have, which is your entire life up until this point when you're starting. Look back and say, who am I? And what were those little like ingredients or nuggets along the way that are like winks and nods from the universe as to what could be potentially my mission? So I also think it's important to distinguish between purpose and mission, because I think people conflate the two or use them interchangeably. And I don't think that they're the same. Your purpose is to become you, just be yourself. So everyone already knows their purpose. It's just automatically, you just become the highest version of yourself, expand your personal consciousness, and just be you. So that's your purpose. That's everyone's purpose. But mission, that looks different for everybody. That's the thing that you attach yourself to and work on and give to the world as kind of your gift. And that could look anything from fitness coaching. It could look at writing a book. It could be teaching English in schools. It could be anything. That is like the machine. And I think people get hung up on that because they think, one, that's not going to change. And that's wrong, because your mission is constantly going to change throughout your life and through the seasons. But additionally, you can't start there because you won't know like what your mission is going to be if you aren't really well connected to yourself. So in that portion of the Da Vinci Blueprint, there's a few exercises that I highly kind of recommend. But one is kind of very simply going back through your life up and until now and pointing out, and I got this exercise from the 80-20 rule book about the 80-20 law, and we can go into that specifically. But essentially, you have these things called happiness islands, and there are these moments in your life where you were disproportionately happy, and they could be like for a week at a time, a day at a time, or maybe even a season, like some summer internship you went to, or a summer camp, or this period of 3 years where you lived in a certain sort of place. And you're trying to point out all these different events and periods of time in your life. And then once you have them all written out, you can start to say like, all right, what are the common ingredients here? Oh, well, it seems like every time that I was disproportionately happy, I was living at the beach. I was moving my body every day. I was working with my hands. I was writing or reading. I was drawing. And all these little ingredients, once you start to kind of create this like essentially web or map of your life, you start to draw out these really key ingredients that could elucidate what your mission could be moving forward, and something that's much more aligned rather than these cookie cutter like job descriptions that you find on LinkedIn, because that isn't drawn or written for or by you. That's written for somebody else. And I think that for anyone listening to this kind of thing, and definitely the people in my audience, I can imagine the same for people in your audience, you as a conscious creative being aren't meant to live on an org chart. Like, no one should be able to tell you in a tight little job description who and what you are. The shadow of that, or the difficulty, or the thing that we're called for, means that we have to go out and write it ourselves. So no one's going to hand you anything, but you also have this kind of creative, amazing ability that many people don't have access to or aren't brave enough to pursue, which is you get to do your own thing. So I know I wandered a little bit, but I think a lot of it has to do with just going back, because all the data you have to work with is just the life that you've lived thus far. The future is this abstract concept that you're constantly kind of pulling from the field one moment at a time, but the past is fixed. Like the ink is dry on that story. So look back as like a giant data set, as if you've already run like a giant clinical study, but it's your entire life, and start pulling those little bits and ingredients, and it'll start to make a lot of sense when you bring consciousness to it, rather than just like looking out into the infinite future and saying like, what should I do? Like it's too abstract. It's not real. There's no way to take a like march forward other than just bash into the walls a bunch and hope that you find yourself in the right place.
Yeah, definitely, man. That was a lot of good information in there. And kind of one of the parts I wanted to hit on is, as you're going about these exercises, you've probably dealt with this too, where it's almost like your old self, or the path of least resistance of going back to your comfort zone, of going back to your programming, if you want to call it that, that is almost like a blockage in between you and actually uncovering that part of you that you know is your true self, the true purpose and the true mission that you have in life. How did you go about almost essentially not letting that dictate your life and your decisions, but actually recreating yourself or reprogramming yourself into that new version that we see today?
It's a good question. And I think that at the very beginning, it's, first of all, understand that it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that is what it's supposed to feel like. So when you start getting that feedback of like self-doubt or kind of unease, or, you know, the first time you put your post online and you're starting to hear these voices in your head, or maybe you're getting feedback from your environment. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, am I really someone who's posting online or whatever? Of course you feel that way because you haven't done it in the past. So you have no data to say that this is who you are. I did a different podcast on this kind of concept. I break out between imposter syndrome and identity lag. So imposter syndrome is you're worried about what other people in the room or the room in your head might say. So that's like other people judging you stepping into this new role. And that's hard at the beginning, but I think for anyone that's stubborn enough like myself, or just stays in it long enough, I think quick enough you get past that, you start quieting, like, okay, I'm not going to let this random person from high school stop me from pursuing my dream. But the other side of that coin is what I call identity lag, which is your relationship to yourself has not changed in your head yet. So you have to maintain that new behavior until your internal identity, sense of identity, has caught up. And the example I use in that podcast is, if you were to go out for a run tomorrow, does that make you a runner? I don't know. You went for a run. You have run once. Does that make you a runner? It's hard to say. But if you went for a run every day this week, you might start feeling like a runner. And if you went for a run every day this month, or for 3 months, or prepared for a marathon, you're eventually going to start to think of yourself as a runner. You've allowed the action or new behavior pattern to settle in essentially to your subconscious, and you're like, no, I'm a runner. Like, it's kind of like you have a fitness brand. Like, you go to the gym, you are someone who is fit, you are a trainer, you are someone who goes to the gym. That's part of your identity. But the first few times, the first few weeks where you're kind of like stumbling, you got the Bambi legs, you're really not settled into anything yet, it's going to feel weird. And in your own brain, you don't actually view yourself as that guy yet. And that's normal. So the point is, like, it's going to feel weird for a little bit. And this works not only for like actions, but also for thought patterns and the way you have relationships, maybe to money, or to the view of the future, or your idea of relationships, or retirement, even. Like, all these different concepts that are kind of programmed into our psyche through the education system, through our parents, and just kind of passed on unconsciously. When you start really breaking through these limiting beliefs, thinking differently is different. It's different to you. So one thing is just being okay with the fact that it's going to feel weird. And two is establishing an environment where it's reinforcing the new thing, rather than you're in constant resistance to the old paradigm. And it's not always super accessible to people. Like, not everyone can immediately move out of their apartment or move out of their parents' house. But to whatever degree you can start to physically separate yourself and start surrounding yourself with people that are reinforcing that pattern, that'll give you quantum leaps. And I've personally split tested both options. I've tried I'm a strong-willed person. The environment doesn't matter. Like, I can stay and live with my parents, so I can stay and live with my old friend group just to save money, and I don't need to leave my hometown. I've split tested that with like buying the ticket and going across the world to a place I don't know anyone, and living in Bali and like doing the digital nomad thing and like taking on more quote unquote risk, taking on more financial burden. And I've done it both ways twice. Like, I went away, came back, went away. And the expansion that you're seeking is way more going to happen when you're in an environment that makes it downhill, just easy, rather than waking up every day and being like, I literally have to resist my environment just to get to baseline, and then be able to do these things that I've never done before, whether it's new levels of content creation, new levels of business development, new levels of spiritual expansion. So in the initial stage, when you can't move out, start to curate that space online. I've talked about that before as well. Curate your information diet, like unfollow/mute relentlessly on social media, and only consume the things that are reinforcing the new version of you that you want to see. That's literally playing the programmer role in your brain, and that's massive. That's where you need to start. And then also start DMing people, like people that you're interested in. Like, you DM'd me, just do it. People respond. It's amazing. Like, I'm a small creator, so I don't have as many DMs to sift through, but even huge creators, I've reached out to people with hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of followers, and surprisingly people still respond. So it's always important to like make that leap of faith, or that initial ask, and you'll start to pick up your people. And what was cool for like my first year or so, I only had those relationships online. And then when you start to take yourself out and you do get to like end the lease and start traveling, you get to meet these people all across the world, whether they are in Bali or Australia or New York City or LA. And it's amazing. Like, the internet is like this crazy time warp reality bending tool that we just have free access to. So start there when you can't move out, and then as soon as you physically can, move out and put yourself into a place where everyone around you, it's normal to be doing the thing that you want to do. Everyone around you has a tripod and is filming content. Everyone around you is going to the gym and taking care of their bodies. Everyone around you is doing a meditation practice every single day, or going to yoga on the weekends, or insert version of you that you're trying to curate. And then you'll look around and you'll be like, you know what? Like, it is normal here. Like, I'm not insane. I'm not crazy. There are other people like me. And it'll start to, again, reinforce that identity pattern and make you more comfortable in your own new skin, if you will.
100%. Yeah. That's such a huge point, that your environment, people, even strong-willed people like yourself, like myself, the environment has such a big role. It does not matter how much willpower you have, how much discipline you have. Like, it's something that you cannot avoid, and you can't try to change that law. Like, some laws in the universe they're just permanent, but you can use it towards your advantage. You can manipulate it towards your advantage. So instead of trying to like, oh man, I'm just gonna outgrind my environment, it's just, bro, just use your environment to your advantage. Use that kind of law to your advantage. So along with that, man, I wanted to ask you also, because within your brand itself, what really caught my eye, it was the concept of self-mastery. And this is something that I've been kind of promoting and kind of preaching, having a fit mind, a fit body, and a fit soul, but now more taking it to the next level of mastering the mind, mastering the body, and awakening the soul. So I wanted to ask you essentially, what kind of spiritual or philosophical ideas sparked this whole idea of self-mastery to you? And what does that word or that topic or that kind of just the lane in itself, the path in itself, mean to you, of being someone who's on the path of self-mastery, who's on this journey of learning how to master themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question as well. And it's almost like a misnomer, because I don't know that you'll ever be able to master yourself, but it is a great bucket term that I've used and I haven't fully stepped away with, because it gives people a good idea just on the outside, like, okay, what are we working on? Like, we're working on the internal world. But I think that in life, like, I'm just extremely bullish on developing your internal worlds and constantly honing the self and connecting more to the self, and letting the external just simply take care of itself. because it is an expression and an outpouring of you. So if you just put all the chips in on you, developing skills, developing your mind, developing your body, all in parallel, like it's this positive upward spiral, and you show up better in relationships. You show up to the interview and you're more capable. You're in a podcast and you're more present, and you can elucidate your ideas more clearly. You have no issues approaching a girl because you're self-confident, so you have no like doubt and fear and whatever from the external environment. So you put yourself in the right rooms to meet the partner of your dreams. Like all these things that you're quote unquote seeking from the external world, they just happen when you are the highest version of yourself. And it's not this like complicated equation like, oh my God, how do I find the right version? How do I find the woman of my dreams? Like it's an impossible question. You just become the person deserving of her, and then she arrives. Like it's literally magic. All of reality is that same way. So with self-mastery, it would be hard for me to pinpoint something that kind of kicked off my journey specifically, because I've been like I said, I was just like a different kid since I was like 11 or 13. I've been like reading books on philosophy, and obviously it was like to the best of my abilities at that point, but I've always been enamored and captured by like the ancient Greek stories, which now that I'm going down into like my personal heritage more, understanding like where do my people come from, like the Indo-European Aryan race, like all these stories, like connecting back to my history and like what I thought was myth. It was more so like the history of my people. My kind of like blood memory, I already knew that, you know, and like I have these tattoos all over my body, like inspired by the aesthetic. Like I've withdrawn a lot of that brand inspiration as well, because those stories captured me as a boy. And at the time it was just, you know, the stories of the heroes, but quickly you go to like from the stories themselves to the authors of those stories. And it turns out that everyone that wrote the great myths also wrote about philosophy and about these different ideas. So I think it was this, I guess, gradual unfolding. And I could list like so many different titles and so many different authors, but I really think now that I'm in a place where like reading and learning is much more like what calls to you in the moment is the right book that you're supposed to be reading, rather than waiting for some sort of perfect recommendation from somebody else. So try to find the book that meets you where you're at, and then just march your way there. I'm trying to think back to the question as far as self-mastery. Like I think it's also important, again, like I'm big on having these kind of frameworks. So you kind of elucidated out those like 3 buckets that I like to hit on. In the Vitruvian universe, it's these 3 identities that you're supposed to embody. So warrior, artist, and philosopher. And warrior is curating your physical vessel, the body, the temple of God. Philosopher is your mind, developing your philosophy of self, like what do you believe, why do you believe it, shattering limiting beliefs, etc. And then of course that highest pursuit is artist, like how can you now flip the paradigm and create and generate and put outward into the universe what your gift is to give. So it kind of ends up being this pyramid of self-mastery, which you probably saw a recent post and article I wrote about that. But you start with the base of that pyramid, which is your physical vessel. Once you've kind of curated that, you've done 90% of the work to expanding or allowing yourself to get to these higher ideals and mindsets. That's when you can start attacking the mental world. And at some point you read enough philosophy that you realize that the end point of all this intellectualization is actually spirituality and its embodiment of the mystical and magical experiences, the pulling from the ether, the kind of woo-woo, if you will. I think anyone that spends enough time thinking about these ideas and thinking about the universe and trying to get an answer, you eventually realize like, it's magic, like it's God. It's this further thing that I don't need to grasp necessarily with words, but I can experience them through divine revelation, through prayer, through synchronicity, through art, through love. But you can only get to that tippy top, that like woo-woo kind of tip of the pyramid, if you've taken care of your physical vessel. Like if you're stuck in a position of like low health, which is kind of the stage that you help people at, is like cracking out of that malaise of low health, right? Like getting people fit is most of the work. It really is. Like it's like 90% is flipping somebody from poor health to high vitality. And then we can talk about things like we have on this podcast. Like the only reason you and I can go back and forth on this is because I take care of my body. Like I got an amazing night's rest last night. I fed myself with amazing food. I woke up, did the same thing. I'm hydrating, all these different things that are allowing me to then be able to be with you in like a
Mm-hmm.
high vibrational state. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the framework. I know I kind of like wandered a little bit, but
That was
yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, that's something that essentially kind of like the vision of my brain when before I even like knew what I was gonna do. Like one of my first videos, I talked about what's like a fit mind, a fit body, and a fit soul. I mean, and I have like this kind of analogy of the body is like the car, the vehicle we use for this human experience. The mind is like the steering wheel, but the soul and the spirit is the one who's driving it. However, in the modern world we live in today, somebody else, your spirit or soul, is got his mouth duct taped up with handcuffs and thrown in the trunk, and it's the programming society driving your vehicle wherever it wants to go to, driving your mind, the steering wheel, wherever it wants to go to. And to me, what self-mastery is almost like awakening that soul and taking it outside of the trunk and finally taking back control over your life, over where you were always supposed to go to. And taking another layer, it's like once you kind of do all the work that we said right now, from the body over to the mind, then to the spirit, it's you almost access what I like to call your spiritual senses, like intuition, your sixth sense, which is almost like a GPS within that car of where you're supposed to go in life. Because right now, like you said, like I've experienced too, you don't know exactly what you're doing with this brand, what you're going to go next. It's just like you follow your gut, you follow the spiritual senses that most people have disconnected and deadened over time through all the nonsense that society pushes out to us. So once you start kind of improving yourself upon those areas, you start to, I like to think of it almost like you have the concept of the devil and angel on one shoulder. I kind of like to think of it as like the higher self and the lower self. The lower self is not bad or evil. It's just kind of the lower levels of nature, animalistic. While in the higher self, the more you get closer to that, the volume of it raises. So when you go throughout life, you kind of know you have to take this left turn right here, right turn right there, stop right here, etc., etc. It's almost like another analogy I like to bring back to is, you ever been in those arcade rooms where it's like all dark and everything is just like pitch black and there's one tile that's lit up, and you step on that tile and then another tile lights up and then another tile lights up. So that's kind of like the path of what you're going on, what I'm going on. And one thing I kind of wanted to hit on that you kind of express is that the warrior, the philosopher, and the artist. So the warrior was, of course, the body. The philosopher was the mind, but the artist is like the spiritual expression of what you're brought here to do. If you understand these types of concepts, you understand, I know that you understand that each and every single one of us were kind of brought here for some form of creation, some form of bringing life into the world that could help elevate humanity's consciousness in some way, shape, or form. And one thing I really kind of recognize and kind of admire within your work is you understand that the entrepreneurship side of things, the online business or the personal brand side of things, is not just a money grab or just like scam, etc., which most people will just equate that to, but it's actually a vehicle for spiritual enlightenment and a spiritual evolution. So kind of talk about that. I know that you can kind of express in detail on how you view your brand, your mission, your purpose as a means for not only you got the body, the warrior side of things set up, you got the philosophical and mindset of things set up, but that all leads to the pinnacle, which is the spiritual expression, which kind of will allow someone else to light up their body and then take over their mind, and then they do it, and then just like a domino effect.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that you have to follow that kind of stair-step pattern to get to the place where you are in that creator role. And so everyone's kind of natural progression, and it was the case for me. Like that's how I elucidated this whole concept of the pyramid of self-mastery, is because I just retraced my steps, because I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't putting any art into the universe way back when, right? Like whenever this journey started for me as a child, I was just trying to get abs. I was just trying to beat the physical insecurity that I had. I was Google searching like six-pack shortcuts and all that stuff. But from there, you start to learn like, okay, it's not just training, it's nutrition. And then what does nutrition mean? It's like biochemistry. Okay, what's going on there? Like that affects your mind and mindset. It just like slowly precipitates into this world where eventually, like you said, you're being creative. And in the Vitruvian manifesto, which is kind of the mission statement, if you will, of like what I'm trying to build, is you are the creator and the creation. And the Bible says like you are made in the image of God, which means you are a creator in of yourself. We are in lockstep co-creating reality, just like God. Like I don't take that lightly. I mean that in the most literal sense. So it is in our nature to create things. That is actually something that if you reject, you will experience negative side effects, in my opinion, not only physically, but spiritually. You'll have a lack of fulfillment, lack of content. So until you're in a place where some portion of your life is generative and creative, and it doesn't have to be the way that you make money. In many cases, I actually don't think it should be. But you do have to have some bucket of your life where you're being creative, even if that means just writing in your journal every single week, or once a month you go to like a painting class, or maybe it's your movement practice and you're just trying to flow creatively. Maybe it's jujitsu, whatever it may be, but you need to be expressing yourself. It is actually in your nature, and it's what separates us from the animals of the field. There's something else going on with our consciousness. So for myself, having kind of ascended that pyramid, if you will, and it's not necessarily hierarchical, but it's just the path, I'm now in a place where this bucket really fills my spirit. It scratches that itch of creative necessity. And the amazing thing is it's also, like you said, it's lighting or pouring gasoline on the embers of other people's spirit who maybe don't have the tools, right? Like maybe seeing a framework that I put out on an article, or using some of the tools I say, or the mental reframes, or maybe working one-on-one in a coaching, or joining a community, whatever it means. Like, and this will continue to change over time. You know, I'm launching a physical product brand this next year, so people will be able to hold the things that I create and use them every single day. Those little nuggets that I get to drop for the rest of my life, hopefully are going to spark more and more and more and more, one at a time, people giving their gift to the world. And when you think about things like impact, you could spend your entire life trying to make you to be really impressive and whatever, and you could theoretically have a really big impact. Like we can point out people like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Steve Jobs, all throughout history, these individuals. But I think the fastest way to like logarithmically increase your impact is just to do it through other people. Like I get to live 1,000 lifetimes if I can touch 1,000 hearts rather than just my individual life. And I think eventually that might precipitate itself into writing a book, because I think books are really magical, and it's another way where like I create this thing and then an infinite amount of people could consume it. Podcasts are the same way. Like I have this massive body of work that's just continuing to accrue over time, that until they turn the internet off, it's just going to sit there and people can continue to stumble upon and continue to view and continue to consume. So I'm trying to put myself in as many of those infinite games as possible, and then just continue to play. So yeah, it fills me with so much gratitude to be able to do this. Like even what we're doing right here, right now, like this is amazing. You and I are creating a resource that will live on until it gets erased, and people can continue to come back to it, re-listen, take notes. And even if just one person from your audience, from my audience, stumbles and hears this one, and like something you said or something I said, it's like, hey, I never thought of it that way. Or maybe I should go check out the Da Vinci Blueprint and try that one of those exercises. Or maybe I should, focus on my diet and nutrition, or like, let me invest in a course. Let me invest in a coach. It's like those little nuggets that you open the door or drop a little reframe that can allow somebody else to boom. And maybe they're the one that builds the $100 million, $1 billion business. Maybe they're the one that completely changes the trajectory of the human race. Maybe they are the one to dismantle the pharma medical complex. Like all these things that we want for the world, it doesn't have to be us. It doesn't have to be us, but we're just helping the whole team win. And it's like the quote, like rising tide ship lifts all boats. So I'm just trying to pour fuel on the fire and watch it all go up. And it's my opinion that all the material needs will be taken care of for me as long as I am acting out of my highest self and in the service of the greater good. Because like you talked about, like online business is a very grifter filled space. And this goes far deeper than just online business, like the whole concept of usury and money. I think it's a demiurgic demonic force. Unfortunately, we still have to navigate it. So I try not to focus too much on the money. I focus on doing what I believe is right, giving my gift as much as possible, working as diligently as possible with the gifts God gave me. And I'm just trusting that it's going to take care of itself financially, because I have, at least in these first 2.5 years, taken a massive quote unquote pay cut from where I could be. I graduated from one of the best universities in the world. A lot of my peers that graduated alongside me, they're 1, 2, 3 promotions deep. We're talking like multiple six figures, working at some of the biggest companies in the world, living in some of the biggest cities in the world. And if I play the comparison game, it starts to feel kind of bad. But then I look at my life and I'm like, no, I'm living, first of all, my own hero's journey, which is my only responsibility. But secondarily, like, I'm just playing on a different timeline. I'm playing for different goals. And if I think, or if I am right about my intuition as to what I'm here to do, then the money is going to take care of itself. I just have to remain diligent and at times be creative in that means, whether it's picking up a side hustle, whether it's doing more outputs, more outreach for finding clients, helping other people on their projects. Like the money, it's like this tangential thing. It's just like this tool that I'm going to use for impact, as opposed to, I think a lot of people view it the other way around, which is like, how do I make money? And then how do I like retrofit my life purpose and meaning into this money thing? And I think that is how the demiurge controls you. That's demonic. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but anyway, like I am not here by any means to grift off people and to make a quick buck. Because I haven't done that. And I think it's going to take care of itself on a long time scale, but I'm taking that as a sacrifice for now so that I can have the impact that I want to.
100%. And that kind of relates to like a Bible quote that I remember. I'm not sure exactly what the quote was, but it says like essentially like, seek ye first like the kingdom of God and everything else will be given to you. So it's like focus on kingdom of God, in my opinion, probably your opinion on the esoteric term, is the self. Your true like embodiment. The temple of God is the body, is the self, it is the soul. And one this kind of goes back to when you're what you mentioned in the sense of how your ancient bloodline, if you want to call it that, kind of gravitated you towards the Greek philosophers and their stories and their kind of schools of thought. And it's funny because this is something also on the esoteric terms that we can get into, how they say essentially your genetic code, your DNA lineage kind of already has the same type of spiritual path that everyone else has, but it's literally like built within your DNA, built within your ancestry. So that's why like within my content, I kind of gravitate towards more of the ancient Eastern mystics, if you want to call it that, because I'm Middle Eastern and all that stuff. So it's cool to see how your kind of ability to connect with that is literally from your DNA. But one thing I wanted to mention was that to bridge off the Bible quote was from the book, the Bhagavad Gita. Have you ever read that or heard of it? Yeah, so within that book, they talk about the law of detachment, which is like essentially focusing all your energy, your attention, your focus on the input, yourself, letting everything else kind of let the chips fall in place. Focus on how can you become what they call a divine vessel for God or divine instrument for God, and just focus on how you can purify your mind, your body, and your soul, and everything else will fall into line instead of just chasing externally for that, chasing externally for this, because those are all temporary and illusionary things. It's not going to give you every true source of fulfillment. You could be in that job right now with all your coworkers and stuff like that, making those six figures, but you're going to feel empty and there's going to feel like a void inside that only this type of path would have ever kind of made you felt fulfilled, because this is what you're preordained to do. This kind of goes into concepts of fate versus free will that we can maybe talk about if that's something that you want to hit on. But one thing I kind of wanted to return back to was the whole concepts of the demiurge. So let's get into that, man. What is that for the people that don't know? How does that connect to money? How does that just connect to the world in itself?
Yeah. So this is a big one, and we could do a whole podcast on the demiurge himself. But yeah, so I was I was raised Christian in the southeastern U.S., so kind of a traditional understanding of the Bible. Went to a public university. I never didn't believe in the concept of God, but I definitely stopped identifying as a Christian in college. Stopped going to church, all that stuff. And then since entering into entrepreneurship, it's been a re-entry into the spiritual world. I've always been exploring, even through high school, all of the different types of religions. I read the Quran, I looked at Eastern Orthodoxy, I looked at, I read the Bhagavad Gita, I looked at the Vedas, and I always you know, I do think the Bible is special. It's why I'm like actually reading it cover to cover, not in that order, but I'm reading the whole Bible this year. It's like one of my projects. Um,
Hmm.
but so the Bible is unique, but I also found like there are these like pieces of truth with a capital T from all over the world. Like there seems to be some sort of like one song that they're all singing, using different words, teaching different things. Um, so I think without like losing people in like a very deep esoteric sense, you can think of the demiurge as like the the Shaitan or Satan, the bad guy of this material world. In the Gnostic tradition, it's understood that the demiurge is kind of like a lower god or a lower entity that either made and or controls this material world. And that's not to say that it is God himself, like the All-Father, the creator of everything, including the demiurge, but that is to say that the demiurge is extremely powerful in this material world. And I think anyone that's like paying a little bit of attention to the world, it's just insane, and it's only getting weirder, right? Like we're seeing all sorts of like subversive transgenderism, there's child sacrifice, this P. Diddy thing's happening, like, and it's all starting to kind of fall apart. What used to only exist on these like niche internet forums and like 4chan and Reddit is now mainstream news. Like, it's crazy. Our politicians are literally TV stars, and then they get elected, and then you find out that they also eat babies, and you're just like, what is going on? So all I can say is that the demiurge is slash seems to be very much in control of this world, and very much invested in the idea of keeping it this way. So another thing that comes from Gnosticism, it's in the Kabbalion as well as other traditions, is like all is mind. So that's one thing I think people can return to, is the fact that like it's your belief that makes it so. There's a lot of like the book As a Man Thinketh, all of the law of manifestation, all these different things. Your thoughts create your reality. So aiming your attention like a laser beam on the things that you want to see more of is very important. And that's why I think the demiurge discussion, spiritual warfare, for most people, it's not super practical or important, and you need to just be focusing on making your life really, really beautiful and powerful. And by nature, you're actually fighting against demiurge. The reason I mentioned it in the context of money and usury is I think that that's one of the tools of this material world that keeps people trapped into this paradigm. Because if you're terrified to just pay rent, to just keep saving, to just focus on these kind of material exchange, and all of your life force, 70+% of your week is focused on doing something in exchange for just enough coins to pay for food and pay for electricity and pay for housing, then you have no time, you have no life force remaining to think about these higher ideas, to think about like, okay, what is actually going on with the politics? Like, why does it seem that all of Hollywood and all of the political world seems to be this just one giant charade? Like, what's going on behind the scenes? Like, why is this happening? What is the Bible trying to tell me? Why does this sound similar to this other thing? You have no gas left in the tank, and that's actually most people. They're just trapped in this like bucket of fear and scarcity. And it's all surrounding around money. And like you go down all the different rabbit holes of like the history of the banking families and the history of when did usury and money even start existing? Why did it start existing? I'm not going to name any names for fear of getting this banned or blocked or canceled or whatever, but there's definitely this priestly subversive class that's existed throughout all of history, continuing to try to like essentially trap the power of noble men, and keep them trapped. So I think money is one of the most pervasive tools, because unfortunately it even limits somebody like myself. Like, I'm at least aware of the problem, but I still have to figure out how to pay rent. I still have to figure out how to pay for things. So I just have to do kind of like spiritual Aikido and Judo, using my awareness to put myself in the place where I have my quest and purpose funded, which is easier said than done, I suppose, but maintaining kind of like a childlike sense of play rather than a seriousness has been really helpful for myself, because that's another thing that the old paradigm or the demiurgic paradigm really tries to put people in, is like this constrictive lower vibrational state of fear and scarcity. But it keeps people in this constricted state where if you're really, really scared and it's like super, super serious and you're thinking these thoughts like, oh my God, like what's my 5-year plan? Like, am I saving enough? Am I going to be okay financially? Like, what if the market crashes? What if there's another recession? Like all these buzzwords that are just really ambiguous and really, really scary. If you're, it literally closes your perceptive field. We know this from like psychology. When an animal is terrified of a predator, it literally perceives less things. Think of the deer in the headlights. It stops thinking rationally. It stops seeing the field for as it is, and it just freezes. Your brain works the same way. If you wake up every single day terrified about paying rent or the future, quote unquote, or all of these different things that you can get wrapped up into, you have less ability to see the world for as it is and see how you could be potentially, first of all, extricating yourself from like the demiurgic paradigm, and then giving your gift and actually breaking into entrepreneurship or spirituality or traveling to a new place or finding the love of your life, all these different things that are what you're meant to do and what you're put here to do. So yeah, I think that the way to ground like what is the demiurge, you can kind of just lump it as just this big negative evil force of like fear, scarcity, lack, and it's when you feed it with your thoughts and you humor the fear, you actually engage in the doubt and the anxiety, and you consume pornography, or you choose to listen to demonic music or consume bad food for yourself. Like all of these different things are kind of feeding that being more energy and making it stronger. And you can literally feel the difference when you're surrounded by people that all believe in that kind of thing and live in that world. It feels darker. It feels more constricted. You go to different cities and different places in the world and you're like, it just feels wrong. But then you go to a different place that might be like a spiritual hub. You might go to like Southern California in the US or Austin, or you go across the world to like where I am in Bali, and you feel these kind of like spiritual centers where more people are thinking differently and they're not feeding that negative demiurge thoughts constantly, and it just feels lighter. It feels more magical. It feels more free, and it's what it's supposed to. That what you feel in those places is the original blueprint, the what God created initially that has no demiurgic veil shrouded over it. So I know I wandered a lot, but again, it's a whole universe that I'm still learning about, but that's kind of how I would describe it, I guess, to like someone who has kind of no conception or maybe has only heard the word.
Yeah, that was a good practical kind of breakdown of it. And one thing I kind of want to like bridge off of that is essentially the concept that you said of if you're in those lower states, you kind of cap off your state of consciousness to be able to evolve to actually be able to create these things. And within the kind of you've definitely seen the 7 chakras, and the lower 3 chakras are they consider these energy centers but also planes of consciousness, because wherever energy goes, attention goes. Wherever attention goes, energy flows. They go and hand in hand with each other. So when you're in these states of consciousness, the 3 lower worlds, they call it, where you're only worrying about sex, survival first, sex, and status. So those are the lower 3. So the root would be survival, just being able to have enough food, pay enough for your rent and all that stuff. And then next one is, how do I get this chance to reproduce, even though half the times people are literally, no more than half the times, 90% of the time, people are indulging that stuff is just for sensual gratification. And then the next one layer above that is status. What can I do so people think that I'm cool, that I'm higher up on this hierarchy? Those are like the animalistic type of states of mind. That's that consciousness that everyone seems to be trapped in. And it almost is like the demiurge to me is almost like the force that acts like almost like a force field or like a lid for the entire world that keeps them stuck in that state of mind, keeps them stuck within this animalistic type of being. And it feeds off that. And the more you feed into it, the more it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point where it has you in a chokehold. And society just kind of feeds you more into this stuff. Fear of the recessions, fear of jobs crashing and all that stuff, feeding you nothing but junk food. You see all this type of propaganda for it and all this advertising for it. Free pornography, free promiscuity, all that stuff. Status, showing people that, oh, to be an alpha male, to be this, to do that, you have to have the Lambo, the this, you have to scam if it doesn't matter. So all that stuff kind of is the demiurgic force that holds people in that chokehold I said, that literally you cannot see and ascend to. If you want to bring it back to the chakra scale, the heart chakra, which is like actually spreading love to the world in some way, shape, or form, which is like the ignition where people start to realize, oh, there's more to life than just survival, sex, and status. There's something here I'm supposed to do. What is it? Then you go to the third chakra, which is creativity. How do I actually express my stuff to the world, express my gifts to the world? And then you tap into intuition, and it just keeps going higher to you get into that state of almost divine bliss where you're probably feeling it right now. You feel fulfilled in life where you're actually going through it. You feel like you're actually playing that role that you were brought here to do. You don't feel like you're chasing someone else's agenda, falling into someone else's narrative. So that's amazing how those two kind of correlate with each other. But what I wanted to ask you is essentially, how did you get out of that demiurgic force? What were the practical steps that you took? I know that you probably didn't understand at that moment, oh, there's a demiurgic force keeping me down, thinking about all these lower level desires. But like, what kind of sparked your interest, or sparked your kind of was the tipping point that brought you to actually take your life more seriously, in a sense where if I want to be my best self, everyone says that, oh, I want to be my highest self, my best self, whatever kind of buzzword term that you've heard, but no one actually will do the things possible to get them there. What was like the tipping point or the moment in your life that really was like, yo, if I'm really trying to become my best self, I got to change certain things. I got to shift my perspective from just indulging the lower level senses to actually aiming my pursuits towards the higher centers or the higher states of consciousness in life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, as you're probably expecting, it was less of a moment and more of a gradual unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, and this is maybe more controversial, I think that certain people are just born more or less resistant to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I personally never was too degenerate. I like what naturally had this like intuitive resistance. I never did drugs growing up. I didn't drink until I was 22 or 20 years old. Like much later, it was my second year of university, and only just to try it. And I only really engaged in that for like 2 years, and now I'm sober again. So I've just never really been pulled into that. And I think that I got the feedback like, oh, you're an old soul, all of these things. So I think that I was planted here with a lot more experience spiritually than other people, just because like my eternal soul has probably lived more lifetimes than other people. And that's not like a better than, worse than, it's just like literally the card I was dealt. So some part of it was like who I am or where I started. And you can bring things in like blood memories, strength of your ancestors, stuff like that. I think it's also possible I descended from a strong spiritual lineage as well. But I'm only kind of privy to these concepts now. All this like demiurge, whatever, like all this learning, this gnosis is much more recent, probably the last few years. So I'd say the thing that like really accelerated all of this for myself was probably starting around the pandemic, where I think a lot of collective consciousness and portals were opened. Things started to seem a whole lot weirder. That was probably the first step. Like, okay, something's going on here. And then in pretty short succession, 2 years later or whatever, I graduated university. And that's also when I entered, as I call it, the arena of entrepreneurship. And I quickly found out that like entrepreneurship, staying in the game, staying in the arena is way more than anything else. It's a spiritual playing field, because it's just actually not that hard. Like the classes I took, like I took biotransport at university, biomechanics, like all those classes I took at university are way harder than learning how to build an online business, just like materially, conceptually. It's actually not hard to do entrepreneurship, but it is very hard to stay in entrepreneurship when you don't have the feedback, when you're worried about rent, when you're surrounded by people who don't believe in you, when you don't have any data to believe in yourself. So I found pretty quickly that like, okay, if I'm going to stay in this game, I need to be developing myself in parallel. And what's also cool is you find out that other people who are in entrepreneurship, like as you start to develop your circle, they're going through the same thing. And they likely believe a lot of the same things that you do too. They realize about all the health scams and the money scams. And then from there, kind of this greater like spiritual scam, demiurgic world. And it's like this unfolding as you learn and as they teach you and as you are developing yourself. It starts to just get crystallized into like this really strong theory. And I feel like in the last 6 months or so, I finally kind of, I'll never stop developing myself, but I think my internal world is finally crafted. I finally have these like frameworks that are really, really strong. And now it's like turning that thing outward and just blasting it into the universe and really, really expanding into the material world and doing good. I feel like I've spent so much time in the last 2 years hardening my internal world and protecting myself spiritually so that I can now take that energy and attention. The foundation is laid, and I can just put it out into the world in a creative force and not be afraid of any of the things that may have scared me in the past or may have limited me in the past. So I think the biggest leap was 100% stepping into the entrepreneurial world, because realistically, it's like it very much is a spiritual step, because you're finally stepping off of these train tracks and just onto the great beyond. There's no clear map. There's no path. You have no idea what the next step is. It's just this huge ocean of uncertainty, and you're charting your own path. And that level of uncertainty is what life is. You finally face, with all honesty and transparency, life itself. I think the Demiurge, like, it keeps you trapped because it tells you like very comfortable lies. Like, oh, this is your 2-year, 3-year promotion. This is your 5-year plan. This is when you're supposed to get married. This is, sign this 30-year mortgage. And it's just like everything is kind of just gently laid out for you. It's like all comfortable enough. And that sense of certainty we want to latch onto. But if you meet and face uncertainty and life full on, it's very overwhelming at first. But once you get to the place where you internalize that and you're like, no, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is the texture of experience itself. And you fall in love with that. That's what the game is about. Then you get to play on like admin mode, and you just like start creating reality in this like really 3D sense. And I feel like that's where I am now, but it's taken time. So I think that the acceleration point, if you like looked at a graph of my consciousness expansion, it was like a slow development over time, and then right around stepping into the arena, it was just this logarithmic blast off.
Gotcha. And I really like how you kind of talked about the unknown path and the known path. So essentially, like within this whole kind of dichotomy of awakening to the soul and like understanding that you're here for a true purpose, not like just following the status quo, you're trading in the false illusion of safety for the actual unknown possibilities and things that are outside of those train tracks. And one kind of analogy I've always like noticed about myself, you're probably like this too, that like when I would go hiking with my friends, one of my favorite things to do is go hiking, find a cliff jump spot. I would always, no matter how what age I was, my friends would like follow the trail, and these guys are like more indecisive and they need people to like tell them what to do. Follow this trail, you'll be at the thing. Every time I would just randomly just start going off trail, finding my own little spot, and then be like, yo, come down, like stop doing that. I was like, no, fuck you guys, I'm just gonna keep going, find my own thing. I was like, wow, I found a better cliff jumping spot, and like all these guys would be like sitting there like waiting for somebody to jump, and like, I don't know about this and that. I'll be the one that'd be like, you know what, fuck it, man, if I break my leg, I break my leg, but like I saw someone else do it, so might as well just give it a shot. So that kind of personality trait is probably like ingrained within you as well. But it's just like an analogy of like how if you want to see a better viewpoint or a better scenic view of life in itself, you got to be willing to not just take that same path that's going to go, everybody goes down it. It's not bad, it's not evil, it's not anything like just horrible, but it's like, well, whatever, you get there, everyone else is doing it. But if you truly want to like live an extraordinary life, you got to be willing to like just trek your own mountain, trek your own trail, and like everyone's going to be like, yo, what are you doing? Like, get down, get back on this trail. But you just got to listen to that intuition. Always like that weird spark in me that's just like, yo, I need to do this. And which we kind of like little discussed about this a little bit before we hopped on the call. You said you looked at the background, you're like, that's a nice psychedelic background. But every time I took psychedelics when I was go hiking, it was just like up to another level of me just like I'm so full of the psychedelic juices, if you want to call it that, and just like I'm following the intuition, my spiritual senses are kicking in, and I just find my own path. But speaking about that, kind of wanted to ask you, you kind of sprinkled this into within your answer, the concept of gnosis. And this is something that I understood what gnosis was when I started taking things like psychedelics and stuff like that. So I wanted to ask you essentially, what is gnosis to you? How have you unlocked it? What is like a practical term of what gnosis is? Because it's a Greek word and it means inner knowledge, divine knowledge that can only be accessed from within. Funny enough, within my private Patreon community, I have like a membership tier called the School of Gnosis, like school of actually accessing that type of knowledge within you. So within your kind of realm and within your kind of lens, what does gnosis mean? How does it apply to someone's life? And how have you accessed it within your own journey as well?
Yeah, I love that you asked, and it is something that I've experienced much more deeply over the last 2 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the simplest terms, knowledge with a K is in your head. These are things that you can study, these are things that you can read, you can learn about these things. Even this podcast is an example. I've described to you the demiurge, I've described to you these other concepts, intuition, for instance. Gnosis is experiencing those things and feeling them and going to a place and having an intuitive feeling like something's off here. That person doesn't seem to be a good person. I can't explain why, but I know for whatever reason. Or I feel like I should book this trip. I can't really explain it, but I just feel like there's somebody I need to meet. And then you go and you experience meeting that person that you had no idea was there. That is gnosis. In the simplest sense, it's going from head knowledge to heart gnosis, felt and embodied knowledge. And I think that that is the hero's journey. It's taking what you learn in the school of life, under mentorship, under tutelage, reading the great books, and then going out on your hero's journey and actually embodying the experience and taking that knowledge conceptually and being like, oh my God, I just felt what Aristotle was talking about, or I just felt what Siddhartha felt in the great stories. Like, I actually lived that hero's journey. I know I've now taken that knowledge from my head to my heart. And psychedelics is kind of like it's another technology or tool for you to do that. It's like a super highway. That was one of my takeaways. I had my first psychedelic experience this year, and like I said, I didn't grow up taking any sort of drugs or anything, so it was kind of like a big step for me. I did like a facilitated experience with a friend of mine, James, here in Bali, and one of my bigger takeaways was this concept of like the 5D reality, or the matrix, if you will. I understood that conceptually, like in my head. I fully believed it, fully agreed with it. But to actually kind of see it and see the matrix in its like ethereal nature and see what's kind of behind the curtain, if you will, that became gnosis for me. It became this inner knowing where it's like, okay, cool. I read all these books. I've talked to people about it on podcasts, but now I've like felt it, and I've like literally seen and kind of meandered around and like touched the curtain and the veil. And now I kind of gnosis. I know it with a GN rather than a KN. And that's like, yeah, without wandering too much more, I think that the best way to conceptualize it is head to heart. And I think people have, even if they haven't studied esotericism or any of these wisdoms traditions, you've probably already experienced it because you've fallen in love before. And when you were a kid, you saw love stories. Maybe your parents told you about falling in love. Maybe you read a book. That's cool. You saw the like Disney, whatever. And then for the first time in your life, you fell in love with someone. And everything about that term completely changed. Like love got from just the drawing of a heart on a piece of paper to this technicolor, beautiful experience. Like you totally, like you hear music differently. You understand why every song is about love. You look at paintings differently. That's gnosis. And everybody probably has felt that. If you haven't, it's on its way to you. And that was probably like my earliest version of gnosis, I guess, would be like falling in love and then experiencing heartbreak. But it works in all verticals of life. And I think that the end point of all knowledge, of all academia, of all study, is eventually Gnosis. Your goal is to
Mhm.
embody it into a spiritual experience.
That's bars right there. That's fire. I love that analogy. But essentially, you opened up this box right here. If you've taken your first psychedelic trip, and we got to get into that then too. So, one thing I kind of want to say also within the premise of what you kind of explained is this is almost like a super highway. I like to think of it as like a steroid for the spiritual growth that access you into Gnosis. So, especially when you hop on steroids, I obviously haven't taken steroids. You haven't taken steroids probably within the gym terms, but when you hop on it, you just gain muscle easily, you recover quicker, all that stuff. That's why you can just grow so much faster than everybody else. But when you are off the steroids, you kind of revert back to your old ways. You kind of lose that kind of sense. So same thing happens with psychedelics, but it also at the same time, it kind of ascends you towards these stages where these yogis, these great mystics, these philosophers, these sages, saints, all like develop through different practices of meditation, self-inquiry, pranayama, breath work, all that stuff. So they did all that stuff to get to that point, but you just took this one substance and it unlocked something in you, and you just tasted it. You got a little taste, and what you said right there, you saw the matrix for what it is. You saw this temporary illusionary world for what it is. And one of my most profound kind of like experiences of that was taking LSD, and I was like on like a top of my this viewpoint within my area, and I started noticing all the like the grid patterns of like my city, and I was like, oh, I started seeing like the kind of the number codes of like in the movie The Matrix, and I was like, okay, out of everything in this world, the real red pill, the real like actual truth knowledge is held within these psychedelics, and it just shows you that Gnosis. That's what it is. Like the real red pill is Gnosis, but this is like a gateway to Gnosis right away. No work needed, but it's also dangerous at the same time too. But I wanted to ask you, how was that experience as someone who just tried it recently, within this year, who's had already all this type of knowledge? Because like when I was starting all these substances, I was just like a teenager and stuff. You know, I mean, I wasn't like understanding of these levels of the demiurge, the actual self master, and all that stuff. So you had a much better foundation. So once you added that into it, it kind of just enhanced it and accelerated that even more. So let me know how that went, man.
Yeah, so I did a whole podcast on it if people want to hear like the long of it, but I definitely think you hit on something important. I don't know that I agree with the analogy of steroids, only because I think steroids have just intrinsically negative side effects, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think that psychedelics are the same way. I do think it's much more of like it's an accelerant. It's like a super highway. It's like
Mm-hmm.
tesseracting the work, and it lets
Mm-hmm.
you get a glimpse, like you talked about, of the things that are endemic to your experience. Like you can achieve through years of prayer and petition, years of breath work and artistic creation, and curating that relationship with God naturally and endogenously, because your body
Mm-hmm.
makes DMT as well. Like the reason it happens is a substance that is endemic to your body. So my
Mm-hmm.
encouragement, and I don't actually recommend psychedelics to people. I think you just know in your life when it is time, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to be guided by intuition. Like you should never feel peer pressured. You should never take the recommendation of some dude on a podcast. Like you
Yeah,
need to
no,
just
we
know
just
for
fucked
yourself
it
when
up.
it's right
Yeah.
to take that trip. Um, but it's also to say that everyone's journey is different. Like it was not wrong that you took them as a 16-year-old with no context, and it's also not wrong that I took them as a 25-year-old with much more quote unquote context or experience. It's just our paths were different, and so
Mm-hmm.
you'll know, you the listener, when it's right for you. And that's a big caveat I want to lead off with, because they are a powerful experience, and I think that without intention you're basically just getting high,
Yeah.
and it can feel good, it can be interesting, it can get visuals, whatever, but like the whole point is to show you something, teach you something, learn about yourself and your experience more deeply, in my opinion. And if you enter it with that intention, you set that intention with yourself and with God and with the substance, and you say like, I'm going in this to learn about myself, or I'm going in this to heal specific trauma, I'm going in this experience to reconnect with God or reconnect with my power, or whatever your intention is, then it's powerful. Again, remember, all is mind. Like, you are at the seat, you're at the cause, and these substances are a tool for you. They are not another entity. They're not God. They're not going to come in and give you Gnosis. You have to seek it. You're the seeker, and you're just using a different tool. So all of that caveat away, from my experience, I was probably coming out of a period of like 6 to 8 months where I just felt very stuck energetically, which is not like me. I was doing a lot of externally the same things that I've always done. I was taking care of my body. I was spending time in nature. I was grounding. I was surfing. I was creating content. I was doing all of the external things, but internally I just felt very dissonant, very disconnected from God, where I was just like in this flow state. And I've had experienced it before, but I had just gotten to a place where I was disconnected. And I just, for whatever reason, I felt intuitively that this was the time to use a tool like that. And what was really cool though is in the weeks leading up, like the 2 weeks leading up, my friend James, we did a couple of calls ahead of time to kind of set intentions and talk about how things were to go. And as soon as I had, sent him the down payment for the experience to facilitate, and had made that like hard commitment that like I'm gonna do this, in the weeks following that commitment, before taking them, I was already starting to feel more connected with God, which to me is like, it's like the Bible verse where it's like, call and I am there. Like seek the kingdom of God and I am with you. So that was really cool, because like once I made that genuine heart-centered call for help, like outbound call to God, he was immediately there. So that was awesome and very unique. And I think it's important to say also, because again, the mushrooms or whatever substance you choose to take aren't going to solve your problem. Like God is the powerful thing. You're using it to access God. So that was awesome. And then to speak on, I guess, like the experience itself, it was very intense. He gave me a pretty high dose. He obviously kind of just made the intuitive call, like how much he wanted to give me. I had no previous experience, so we had nothing to go off of. He gave me enough that I definitely felt it, and I definitely had a pretty intense experience. We started off closed eyes, sleep mask on, music, kind of ceremonial, and then at some point I took the mask off and kind of had more of a visual open eyes experience as well. We rented out a private villa here in Bali, so it was like a very safe space, away from stimulation, all of that. But I, like yourself, you said you started to see kind of these other things that maybe you've seen in art before, like the grid patterns, the numbers. I saw so much, obviously, like traditional kind of psychedelic imagery, but what was really cool is I saw like cathedrals, and I saw these holy temples, not only Western cathedrals like the Duomo in Florence and these other places I visited, the La Sagrada Familia, but I also saw, like, I had recently visited Singapore, so I saw some of the Buddhist temples, and it was kind of just floating into all of these holy spaces that I've seen either in images or in my travels. And to me, what was really cool is like, I see those places of worship as a manifestation of the 5D trapped in the 3D, that these artists use divine inspiration to create and to show us this is what's really going on, and this is a tiny fragment of what's happening behind our reality. And it was cool to just see it all kind of like flowing in and out. And this was all, again, closed eyes visuals. And that was a really cool like intuition or experience where I was like, okay, that's what they were trying to do. Like when they created these pieces of art, these cathedrals, these places of worship as an act of worship to the divine, they were getting downloads from the source code. They were getting downloads from the actual material itself. And we get to see it in the form of these cathedrals, in the form of these churches. But it's always there. It's actually always happening just behind the curtain. It's only that our perceptive field is blocked or limited or maybe insulated by the demiurge, if you will. And we can do these different techniques or spiritual tools or meditations or psychedelics to have an experience or more of a direct access, open our perceptive field to what's kind of always going on behind the scenes. So that was my experience in a short summary. I had a lot of like personal things that I feel like closed loops. It wasn't like a snap my finger, woke up the next day feeling better. It was more like I have felt since exiting that period much more connected and aligned. And I think a lot of that, if not all of it, was the intention itself, and that the psychedelics were just part of the journey.
That's awesome. I really wanted to hit on the concepts of someone bringing the 5D fractalized nature of reality into the 3D world. But within that sense, I want to ask you essentially, before we kind of wrap things up, I want to get into kind of the almost the message and your own way through the Vitruvian, through your brand, through your message of how, what is the thing that you're bringing out from the 5D, that only the type of knowledge or gnosis that you can access that you're trying to share to the world. Like when people listen to your podcast, they buy into your courses, or they get into your programs, they work with you one-on-one, they just involve themselves within everything considered in the Vitruvian. What is the main gist or the main message that you want to extrapolate from that 5D universe and plug into this 3D universe through the vehicle of your personal brand?
Yes. Well, if you'll allow me to read, I think that the best distillation I have is the Vitruvian Manifesto itself. I really think that that's one of the things I'm most proud of writing. I really feel like it was something that was channeled through me as opposed to something I created out of my own will. And yeah, I'll read this and then I'll kind of try to summarize, but it goes as follows. You are the Renaissance. There will be no grand crusade to join, no mass demonstration. The movement is not collective. You are the movement. You are the dreamer and the dream, the creator and his creation, the artist and his masterpiece. Your noble cause is your self-discovery. Your great war is within. The world's people are losing themselves. They're directionless, numb, passive, and afraid. They're content with small dreams and defend the status quo. Their misery seeks company. Do not join them. In a world that's lost, find purpose. In a world of degeneracy, lead with virtue. In a world of specialization, study everything. In a world of ordinary, be uncommon. In a world of decline, be the Renaissance. So yeah, literally every time I read that, I get chills, which is insane because I wrote it. Like, it sounds gimmicky, but I get chills every time, which to me like indicates that something special that God breathed is in that. And the whole message, like the statement or the mission statement, is be the Renaissance, which is embody the movement that you want to see. I think so much of our generation is waking up and saying, like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this system is broken. There's evil in our world. It seems to be all around us. I don't want to just have this normal job. I don't want to have this normal existence. It can't just be that simple. It can't be why I was put here. And the truth is, if you feel that way, you're right. And the call to action for people that feel that way is that you're going to have to be that person. Unfortunately, for right now, there isn't a sign-up sheet. And until there is a place that we can all go, which we're all working on individually, everybody's trying to build these different centers. You have to embody the movement, become that version, master yourself, and the external world will start to reflect it. The truth is, my story is exactly this. It was my internal world, and then I started to make stuff online, and slowly I've started to meet other people that through my creation have been able to see, okay, he gets it. Let's invite him into these other projects, or have him on my podcast, or, come to this event center, speak at this group, all of these different things. And it's only just beginning. Like, it really is still early days, and God willing, if I'm kept here a long time, I'm going to get to experience more and more and more of it. And it's going to start to manifest in these much more material things. It's going to be retreats. It's going to be physical spaces. It's going to be potentially youth centers, maybe education, maybe even hospital systems, like new nations. Like, who knows how big it can get, but it can't get that big until you start with you. So embody and be the Renaissance. And that's the message right there.
That's beautiful. Yeah. How everyone, whatever you want to kind of see within the change within the world, it's got to start with you. You can't, there's no kind of control within the external world. This is something with the Stoic philosophy that you probably resonate with, that you cannot control the external world. You can only control what I like to call the inputs, what you actually put into your life, mentally, physically, spiritually. That's all you can control. Everything else will fall in line with however it is. But actually taking that next step, instead of complaining about things, instead of like, oh man, I wish this would be better, that would be better, it's you starting off with that, man. So before we wrap things up, man, I wanted to ask you also, with all that said in stone, what are some new things that you're working on within the Vitruvian? What are some things that we can expect from you in the coming months, weeks, years that you got planned out for us?
Yes, sir. Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on, and thank anyone
Mhm.
who's made it thus far to listening. I always salute the real ones who listen to the end of podcasts, because I think there's often nuggets like that make it right to the end. So, yeah, for myself, it's a lot of more of the same. YouTube is kind of my main platform where I'm documenting everything. I've got a vlog series that's like the behind the scenes of just building everything, kind of a window
Mhm.
into my world. I'm trying to get better and better at that practice. I'm still new to that medium, so I have the vlog series, the podcast continuing to speak to the most interesting people I can find and connect with, as well as the solo episodes when I feel like those are necessary. So, podcast, and then also I've recently started a newsletter just to force a writing practice into myself and provide value in more kind of long form thoughts. So, you can sign up to that at thevitruvian.co, just a weekly newsletter. I don't sell anything on there unless it's something that I built or something that one of my friends has built. And as of right now, it's like pitch free. It's free to go. I just want to help people. I'm really not trying to. I don't want to turn it into some sort of business endeavor until it's necessary for me to keep the lights on. And right now, I just want to put truth into the world. So,
Mhm.
newsletter is new. Over the front half of 2025, I'm excited to be launching a physical product, a natural wellness house brand. It's going to be
Mhm.
anything from garments to consumables to different types of art and jewelry and all these kinds of things that are
Mhm.
down the line. But we'll be seeing our first products probably spring 2025, and that's going under the name of Vertis Athletica. You can follow, as for now, only the Instagram page is the first thing I've started. Website is under development. Starting to reach out to manufacturers and do product development as I return to the U.S. at the end of the year. So that's on the horizon. But the best place to stay in touch are any social medias that you use. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. YouTube is the best place to kind of watch it all unfold, and then podcasts if you find anything interesting that we've said today. That's obviously the longest form medium I'm on. So exciting things in the works, man, and excited to have now connected with your universe, and excited to see what your world develops into, because I think
Mhm.
you also have a good gift to give, and it's exciting to meet other people in the arena.
Mhm. Appreciate that. Appreciate that, man. And what you said right there. So it's the newsletter. You got the YouTube. You got Instagram. So is that all under the Vitruvian? Where can people find you? I'll put everything in the description as well. But just give a quick plug to all that stuff, or where people can go directly and find it.
Yep. So all my links will be in the description, but the
Mhm.
newsletter has links to YouTube. So you can just go to the Vitruvian.co, sign up to the newsletter. You'll start getting the weekly newsletter, and you can also see the podcast, and YouTube is linked on there. If you go to YouTube, you can just search my name, which I assume will be in the title of this podcast, Zach Schenken. Same on Twitter is at ZDSCHENKEN. Twitter and Instagram, that's my handle.
Mhm.
Or you can just search my name. And you can also search the Vitruvian podcast on any platform, and it'll probably bring up my name as well. But yeah, just search my name anywhere. I don't know that it's easier or harder to spell than the Vitruvian.
Mhm.
Kind of a complicated word in both senses. But regardless, you can find me if you search my name. Check the description of this podcast. And yeah, I'm only a shout away. And currently, I respond to all DMs because I have the time, and I really want to connect with people. So if I spoke on anything that resonated specifically, just fire me a DM. I'm always down to chop it and see if I can help in any way.
Perfect, bro. Perfect. Yeah, I'll put everything in the description. But aside from that, man, we touched on a bunch of different topics from personal branding, psychedelics, spirituality, self mastery, and all that stuff. So really appreciate you joining on the podcast, man. And if we ever do a part two, maybe hop on the Vitruvian podcast, man. I'm all down for that, bro. But really appreciate you once again for just joining in and having an enlightening conversation. Hopefully, it'll help this. This will help the your audience, would help my audience in some way, shape, or form. But once again, man, really respect all the work that you're doing, and I'm really excited to see how you continue to expand upon that.
Thanks for having me, bro. And thanks for
No,
listening, everyone.
no doubt, man. Peace out, bro. Have a good one.